Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, this is Redberry Wheel here, and welcome back to another Learn to Lead video. Now, I am currently having my hair up, and I'm wearing my tan shirt for wearing my ABUs to the CAB meeting tonight, so I hope you have been getting an opportunity to wear your uniform regularly at home. If you have been doing your virtual meetings, at least I hope you're turning on your webcam and trying to get as close to a human interaction as you can through the webcam experience. But it's okay if you can't, but it's also pretty nice to be in uniform and being active in Civil Air Patrol. So let's go ahead and talk about Chapter 8 from the Learn to Lead series, which talks about communication in both spoken and written forms. Communication has three main purposes: to entertain, persuade, and inform. And one of the most important things that you need to keep in mind whenever you're putting together something that's going to be read or something that you're going to share verbally is that you need to know who your audience is. For example, a professional doctor who has done 30 years of experience in the field would not want to listen to a speech that is targeted towards very young children, and they may even find it frustrating and stop automatically listening. And by knowing your audience, you can kind of gauge to see where their interests are, and then write or speak to whatever interests them most and what they will understand. Organization is very important to communication, and in fact, we use something called outlines whenever we are putting together like a speech or an essay. So if you've ever taken an English class, you've more than likely heard of what an outline is. And an outline basically is the structure of what you are planning on saying, and it gives you a good idea of where you are going as you are putting your thoughts down on paper. There are a few basic communication principles that are very good to use whenever you are writing or putting together a speech, and I'm going to share with you my little mnemonic for remembering this one. So it goes like this: clear, family, clutter, and state structure. So it doesn't quite make sense because I just put a few words together, but it also kind of describes itself. So clear. You are being clear, you're being specific, you're using direct language, and it's very understandable from what you're trying to convey. The family portion is to use familiar words. So there are certain professions that have something called jargon, which is language that would be specific to someone who is in that field. For example, I could use a bunch of video game terminology, like using polygons and triangles, or talking about rigid body and triggers, and some people may understand what those things mean, but some people might be like, that means nothing to me. I don't know what these things mean, and out of context, I'm just clueless. So by avoiding the use of jargon and understanding what your audience should know will make it clearer in the long run. So those two can tie up together a little bit. Then there's also clutter, which is the use of unnecessary words. If you know the word like or then those are two words that are occasionally used as filler words, where someone's thinking as they're talking and yeah. And that can occasionally interrupt the pacing of a speech, and it's good to be sure that you are keeping your thoughts clear and concise. So by eliminating those needless words, people will be more engaged throughout the speech or the essay. Then there's the and within the clear, family, clutter, and state structure. The and is actually not related at all. It's active. So you want to write in active voice. So there's the difference between active and passive. So for example, if I am providing a recommendation to the squadron commander and I say, for the squadron's path moving forward, it is recommended that we come up with a clear mission, vision, and command intent. That is a very, very just active voice because I am speaking directly and I am also being very clear and confident, because it comes across as this is something that I suggest the squadron needs. And I'm not saying we need to do this. I'm also being respectful about it in providing a suggestion that will be final, or there will be a final decision made by the squadron commander. Passive would be like, it is possible that the squadron could use some improvement, and there are some things that we could do, but I'm not sure. Or belittling whatever is being said and just saying, like, this is my recommendation, but I'm just a cadet second lieutenant. And that's more passive. So by being active and having a strong voice and being clear and direct, all of those things tie in very well together. Then there's also the state one. So this one is putting statements in a positive form. So there are some times where you might go to a speech and this speaker is telling you the do's and do nots of leadership. Though it is okay to say do not do this, normally people aren't as responsive to when you say don't do that, don't do that. And it's better to phrase it in a way that almost gives them a choice, but not quite. So let me give you an example. There are a lot of people in the neighborhood that have little signs in their yards that say, no dog poop. And they're like, don't let your dog poop in the yard. Pick up after your dog. And the pick up after your dog is very direct and might even seem aggressive to some people. But there's also like the don't let your dog poop in the yard. And psychologically, when people are told don't do something, they're more likely to actually want to do that because it's almost like challenging them. And they're like, so you don't want me to do that, huh? Well, I'm going to use these paper towels then if you don't want me to use them. Or I'm not going to pick up after my dog because this person's like a snob and who cares if it's a dog? I don't know. Some people are like that, some people aren't. I'm just saying that that is something that happens sometimes. So, by saying, please do this, rather than say, please don't do this, that is something that can be very effective when requesting something or asking someone to do something in a speech or an essay. The final one that we want to talk about today is using parallel structures. This is something that I do with YouTube videos in that I have a beginning, and then I have a middle, and then I have an end. And so there's a parallel across all of the videos. Normally it's just a very short clip at the beginning where I'm like, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And then at the end, I'm like, that's all, folks, toodles. And by having that familiar structure, you know and anticipate what is going to happen. And then there's also just the familiarity of using parallel structures that will re-emphasize points. So if you think of Martin Luther King's speech of, I have a dream, he repeated the phrase multiple times throughout his speech, and he used that similar paragraph structure as he spoke to everyone. And by emphasizing that point and being like, this is our future, we need to think about what we want to do in order to progress, that inspired a lot of people and instilled a sense of, we are in this together and we have a dream together with Dr. King to make the world a better place. So now that we've talked a little bit about different writing principles, or the basic writing principles discussed in the Learn to Lead Chapter 8 book, I want to talk a little bit about the whole writing process and go from start to finish. And there is another memory device that I came up with, which is BAOTTAC, or it's like boat tack, but the A and the O are swapped in the boat. It's something I came up with. If you come up with something better, then please feel free to use that. But I came up with it because it helped me, and I used it to pass the spots. And maybe I had a question in there that was about what step is this in the writing process, and then it actually helped me pass. But I'm just putting that out there. It's important to know the order of this. So let's go ahead and get into it. The first part of it is the B, or the brainstorming portion. And I think we've talked a little bit about brainstorming and the different methods that you can use. Like you could use a little flow chart, you could have like a pros and cons list, or you could do a lot of different things depending on what you are supposed to be brainstorming. So if you're writing a persuasive essay, then you might come up with the topic that you're talking about, and then the reasons why maybe people should join marching band, or the reasons why people should join Civil Air Patrol, or the reasons why dogs are awesome. Whatever it may be, it's good to brainstorm and come up with a list of supporting topics and figure out which ones will most strongly support the argument that you are presenting. Next is the argument, which is the statement that's offered as kind of like the justification for whatever you are asserting or you're putting forward. So your argument could be considered almost like your thesis statement, which is like the overall summary of like the core of what you were trying to talk about. So in the example about marching band, I did marching band, so I'm going to talk a little bit about marching band, and I even did a speech for Civil Air Patrol about why they should all join marching band for RCLS. So I'm just going to talk about that example. So when I was presenting my argument, I presented that marching band instills discipline, music is effective in promoting mental well-being and overall positivity in people's lives, and it also provides community. And so by presenting those different sets of my argument, I was recommending to everyone that they join the marching band. Though I know a lot of people consider marching band for nerds, or they think that they are better than that, or they don't want to play instruments in high school. I presented that as my argument. And one person was super excited when I was presenting, because they were like, hey, I did color guard for like a year, and then I quit. And I was like, oh, that's not what I was expecting. I was expecting you to say, I am still active with the marching band, but that's okay. So let's move on to the next thing, which is the opening paragraph, which contains the hook and the thesis. So a hook statement is kind of something to draw people in. So I used to write little stories when I was younger, and there was a main character that I named Blooper the Stooper. And you know, he was pretty cool. He was a detective, and he did a lot of things. And so the first sentence might have been something like, all was quiet. All was still. Blooper knew something had happened. Something like that. It's just like the reader is just like, I need to know more. And by saying statements that like blow their mind, or statements that make them really question, what is this about? Or ask them hypothetical questions of like, what is going on? That is going to draw your reader in. So think of your hook as what you are hooking your reader on, kind of like a fish, and reeling them into your speech or essay. And then you will have some content in addition to that hook statement that kind of leads into something called the thesis, which I did mention a little bit earlier. And the thesis is what you are trying to convince them. So I could talk about the marching band example, but let's move on to like a Civil Air Patrol example. Civil Air Patrol is important to the success of the Air Force because it supports them in their emergency services missions, provides cadets with opportunities to get into aerospace-related careers, and gives members an understanding of community service before self, and inspires them to assist the community. That would be considered a thesis statement because it presents what it is and the reasons behind it. And then later on, we would discuss counter arguments and like validate other points of view while also acknowledging the other points of view and suggesting why your perspective and your argument asserts over that. So let's move on to the next portion, which is topic sentences. Topic sentences are the beginning sentences of the paragraphs. And each topic sentence serves as kind of like a little taste of what that next paragraph is supposed to be. So let's come up with a new example. Dogs. Dogs are fluffy. And that is why they're awesome. So in my topic sentence for my essay about dogs, one of my arguments might be they're fluffy, right? So that topic sentence would say, one might consider the fluffiness of the dog essential to why it is so awesome. And then I would continue on to talk about it. And that's part of like the transitions or signposts that an essay or speech has. So the reason why we would have something called a signpost is because it kind of gives directions to our audience. If we do not have transition sentences between what we're saying, then it might be a little incohesive and might even be overwhelming. You might lose your audience members and they may not be able to follow what you're saying. So, by having the transition statements between each different section of your speech, which would be like your body paragraphs, or between your intro paragraph to your body paragraphs, or your body paragraphs into your conclusion, just having those kind of statements between each of them, kind of like at the end of your paragraph and at the beginning of your paragraph, it can allow the essay to flow more smoothly and be easier to follow overall. So I mentioned topic sentences, the next T was transitions, and I just talked about it, so I'm going to move along to the next one, which is anticipating counter-arguments. Counter-arguments are people who say, wait, I disagree with you. And then you say, I acknowledge, yes, it is true that dogs may slobber everywhere. However, the benefits of having a dog outweigh the cons because, and then you would go into your argument. It's good to acknowledge the other points that might counter whatever it is that you are arguing, because it is acknowledging them and it's giving them a chance to say, like, okay, it is true, yes. To a certain extent, I agree that dogs can be a little gross, but here is an additional perspective and support that argument that you are presenting. The last portion of the whole writing process is the conclusion. And the conclusion is just kind of wrapping up everything you said, summarizing the whole speech, and telling your audience what they should be taking away from what you were discussing with them. You might even have like a call to action. You summarize it, you tell them what they learned, and you tell them what they should do next. And by summarizing things, that repetition is the mother of learning. So by having them hear what you talked about, that can refresh their memory and make it fresh in their mind, and also because of something called recency effect, the last thing that they heard from you will be what they remember the most, other than the beginning, which is called primacy effect. So primacy effect with your intro paragraph, and recency effect with your conclusion. You don't need to know this, I'm just teaching you psychology right now. So that is the writing process. So remember, you do the brainstorming, you do your argument, your opening paragraph, your topic sentences, transition, the anticipating, the counter arguments and objections, and then your conclusion. So I am going to move on to the next section. The book briefly talks about a staff study, and as you move into being a cadet officer, knowing how to do a staff study can present ideas about how well the cadet staff have been doing, or the staff in general have been doing, present ideas, suggestions, areas for improvement, and overall help the unit. Now, of course, this needs to be respectful, it needs to be detailed, and it also has to have a lot of supporting information. So if you have credible sources, like if you interview someone from the squadron and you include information from that interview, make sure you cite that person. Plagiarism is a terrible thing. Don't just say facts and then not support it. If I talk about a concept that is super complicated, like if I talk about a philosophical principle, I'm not just going to claim that I know utilitarianism. I would probably talk about the philosopher who created utilitarianism, or I would talk about how Kant did things, or I would talk about all those other things. But by citing, that increases your credibility. And I remember I was always shown this image of the Credible Hulk, which was like a little Hulk with glasses, which was cute. I don't know if that's still a thing, but we're going to move on, guys. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about public speaking methods. So I am technically doing a style of public speaking. So by the end of this video, I hope that you know which one I'm using, and if you would like to take a guess at what kind of method of public speaking I am doing and every other YouTuber is basically doing, then you could type it down in the comments down below. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is Manuscript. And Manuscript is literally where you just read off the paper that you wrote. So a lot of scientific conferences are based on manuscript method because, like, they may have written up a procedure on heart surgery and they want to make sure that they're giving the right information to students or other doctors who are learning this procedure. So by reading a manuscript and then maybe even having a PowerPoint to supplement it, they can properly instruct and teach without making mistakes by like misspeaking, because they have that whole script of what they are supposed to say. The next one that is an option is memorizing word for word. So, if you think about a speech that you had to memorize, like, oh Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? Deny thy father and forget thy name, and I will no longer be a Capulet. Or, halte deine Klappe, du stinkenden Flohkissen. Or any other thing. If you think of theater and film, a lot of those things aren't just like people coming up with them on their own. A lot of it is scripted, and they have to memorize it word for word because that is what they were hired to do. And so they act in addition to that memory technique and just regurgitating the words that they had to memorize. Then there is Impromptu, which is probably one of my favorite forms, which is essentially just putting someone in the hot seat and they have to talk. They don't have a lot of time to prepare. They just go for it. So sometimes Squadron likes to have impromptu briefing competitions, or like when I was running encampment, we had an impromptu briefing activity where cadets were kind of like judged on their ability to present a random topic that they could pick from a list and then try to present a coherent speech using their knowledge about speech writing. Did I just receive an email? I think I just received an email. I did. I'm sorry if my email has been going off. I will turn off the sound on my desktop audio. I meant to do that before. I am sorry. So with impromptu briefs, you don't have a lot of time to prepare, and you just have to go off the top of your head on the edge of your seat. Just go, go, go. And there's typically a time limit for those. So if you ever want to try doing an impromptu briefing, just let me know in the comments. I'll give you a topic, and then you practice it. You send me the link to my business email. I'll give you feedback. How about that? I'll give you feedback on your presentation. Your impromptu presentation. I don't know how many people are actually going to watch this, so we'll see what actually happens. But if you are watching this far, thank you. You are awesome. And I would love to see your impromptu briefings if you are interested in doing it. So I'm going to move on to the last one, which is extemporaneous. And extemporaneous is like, if you think of like the outline that we talked about earlier, you would have an outline for an extemporaneous speech, and then you just speak freely. So it's not scripted. You're just going through the process of talking to people and presenting your ideas, and you know generally what you're talking about, but there isn't like a specific way you have to say it. Like the whole manuscript thing where you have to say it verbatim, or memory where you have to say it verbatim or word for word. So for that, public speaking methods mnemonic. I didn't mention it earlier, but I did have one, which is MMIE, which is basically the first letters of each of those. So Manuscript, Memory, the Impromptu, and Extemporaneous, and it's just MMIE. And it's like M pi, but it's MI. It's whatever you want to do in terms of memorization. Again, I'm just saying it works for me and it might work for you. And if you have other memory techniques, I'd love to hear about them in the comments down below. So I talked about the writing process a little bit earlier, and I'm going to just say that speech outlines have a specific purpose. They've got the central ideas, aka the thesis / arguments. They've got an introduction, they've got body paragraphs, and they've got a conclusion. Between each of those paragraphs, they have signposts, which are transitions that bring the whole thing together rather than having separate statements. Now, the end of the chapter is a little bit all over the place because it's like, oh my gosh, there is so much involved with writing. And if you know the Air Force Tongue and Quill, then that is a really good resource if you want to know more about the Air Force's style of writing. And there's also a capped guide on how we write things, and so you can feel free to check that out as well. And I will try to include those in the description if you would like more information on them. We get a little bit about the resume in Chapter 8, and a resume just summarizes your experience, who you are, on like a sheet of paper. And typically, I have received a lot of feedback about resumes, a lot of it conflicting. So there isn't one standard format for resumes. Unless like you're in a company, you're working in a company, and they're like, this is how you format your resume. There isn't like a specific key to doing it. Some employers want all of your experience listed out in full-length sentences and paragraphs even. Some of them just want really quick bullet points about the different skills that you have. And ultimately, it depends on what you're applying for to determine what needs to be on the resume and how it should be formatted. So if you are applying for an encampment cadre position, for example, then you would most likely like put your name and grade at the top. You'd put your email. I wouldn't recommend putting an address, but put your email in there and then talk about your experience. So you might do like flight commander and say like at your unit, and then put the time frame, and then underneath that you would talk about the different responsibilities you had. And when someone's looking at your resume, then they would get a chance to see the different qualifications you have in addition to the experience. And sometimes, like, people will ask you questions during an interview about, you have this experience on your resume. Could you talk to us a little bit about that? Like, tell us what your responsibilities were in depth, or give us a short example or a story of how you were involved with this. And then you can go on from there. One of the biggest pieces of advice that I can give you, though, is just document your work history. Even if you're doing like an internship, or even if you're just doing a summer job, write down the dates, write down what you did. And in the long run, it's going to be a lot easier to put together a resume. So if you had any awards, like if you have achieved your Mitchell Award, that is something really important, and that's something that not everyone can accomplish. So if you've accomplished that, consider including that on your resume as well. Or if you have qualifications, like if you've gotten your first aid qualification and CPR training, that's something else to include. It makes you more competitive. It also talks about job interviews. I will just say that with job interviews, first impressions are very important, and people will jump to conclusions about you. A lot of employers don't really have time to get to know you. They're there to understand who you are, how you work, what you are, and just move on to the next person. Because some companies are just super busy with their hiring staff, and a lot of times they'll just look at your resume and they won't even give you an interview. And in the event that they do give you an interview, being prepared with answers to questions that they have can be very important. So if you are preparing to go and do interviews of some kind, whether it be for Civil Air Patrol positions or whether it be for just a job, practice interview questions. Like, read a list of interview questions like, What was the most challenging experience you've had with an employer? Or what would you say your greatest strength is? Or your greatest weakness? Or explain a time that you had to give feedback to a supervisor. Stuff like that are very, very common questions, and you should be prepared to answer those kind of things. And the best thing you can do is practice. Practice, 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 practice. That's all. In the event that you are applying to things, social media does have an impact. We know this. There's a lot of evidence out there that people post things when they're younger, and then they come to regret it when they get older. So if you even have a single doubt in your mind of, should I really be posting this? It's probably best not to. That's just my thought. I'm doing my best to create quality content that serves the greater good for the YouTube community and the Redberry Wheel community. Social media enables anyone to post anything, anywhere, at any time. And that can be a good thing, and that can be a bad thing. Like, for example, pros to that, people can advertise things all the time. They can say, here, look at this awesome product. Or here, look at something that I have published, and post it all over the internet on any social media platform. But nothing is ever deleted. Anything that you say on the internet stays on the internet. That is all, folks. Until next time. Doodles.